So any avid follower of American comic books will understand the impossibility of discussing their history without inevitably circling back to the Comics Code Authority, the Senate subcommittee hearings that spawned it, and Frederick fucking Wortham. For the uninitiated, the story sums up as comics were pretty wild in the 40s and 50s and times was good, then somebody said think of the children and a lot of people got upset and times was bad. The institution of the Comics Code Authority led to the decades-long limitations being placed on content, kneecapping the medium, and flat out killing entire publishers, hell, entire genres. You talk to an old head long enough, and usually this subject will come up, ending with a rant extolling the virtues and genius of Will Gaines, Al Feldstein, and the golden age of EC Comics, before bitterly decrying the bastards that killed him. But what were those comics? What are the actual tangible stories that made this era so revered? When people talk about this, the heyday of pulp, I often find their references made in the abstract. Rarely, it seems to people actually point to specific stories. So I figure why not do it myself? Share some of the stuff I found that made the good old days so darn good. This ain't your dad rock comics. No sir, this is AM radio. Proper golden oldies. Golden moldies, if you will. Sorry, I've been boning up on the old horror comics, and after a while, the Three Stooges of Keeper, and Witch start to rub off on you. Wait, does that make Drusilla Shemp or Curly Joe? Anyway. Two-Fisted Tales number 20. Colt Single Action Army Revolver. Not the snappiest title, but it does what it says on the tin. This is the story of a gun, if that gun also happened to be the One Ring. Seriously, there's no central character, the narrative follows a firearm as it changes hands between Old West lowlives, laying a swath of bloody sorrow in its wake. Very Johnny Cash, very Devil's Right Hand outlaw country moralizing. Could be a cursed gun, could be a possessed gun, could be just a thinly veiled attempt to convince kiddies the gun's bad, okay? Which is an interesting contradiction to note. The fact that this story, and many like it, were subject to critique for violent imagery, despite the explicitly pacifist messages. Almost like the people criticizing this stuff never actually read the comics. Weird Science number 21, The Ugly One. A fine tale that may be familiar to anyone that has ever casually taken a trip into that land of shadow and substance, that sixth dimension as vast as space and as timeless as infinity, the Twilight Zone. The Ugly One came out a whopping 7 years before Rod Serling's iconic Eye of the Beholder, aka The Private World of Darkness, would air, yet shares a startling amount of common ground with the episode. A human is forced to endure the cruelty and ostracization of living with a deformity until an alien ship lands full of creatures that look exactly like them, and agree to take the outcast as one of their own. They even do a perspective switch twist at the end, with the arriving alien race revealed as humanity, and the titular Ugly One a total knockout by mankind standards. This is it. This is the twist that would shock a generation and be catapulted into narrative infamy a full 7 years before it got big. Now look, I'll be the first to admit that Rod Serling's adaptation knocks it out of the park in terms of presentation. Beholder is a technical marvel, a masterclass on suspense for the still budding television medium. I don't bring this up to diminish from that achievement in any way, more to draw attention to the fact that the premise may have been somewhat of a stock script in the trenches of early sci-fi. Hell, the idea isn't even really unique to EC Comics. You could argue The Ugly One is a reworked version of shock suspense story number 1's The Monsters, a tale in which extraterrestrials arrive on Earth to rid themselves of accidents of creation. A pair of horrible, twisted monsters that ooze various fluids from their olfactory organs and mucous membrane cavities. Terrible creatures that exist solely to reproduce at an alarming rate and endlessly consume it's people, isn't it? Yep, yeah, they accidentally made humans, that's the twist, huh? My point is that you see a lot of iterative storytelling across EC, the same themes and tropes coming in and out like the tides, getting tweaked and reworked, probably planning on an audience that hadn't seen or had disposed of, either physically or mentally, previous versions. And that may seem cynical, but it's worth noting that each time these stories came around again, they were a little bit different, a little bit better. I don't think you get something as clean as Eye of the Beholder without that process happening in the background. Vault of Horror number 24, Impressed by a Nightmare. Impressing indeed, and not just because of the indecipherable opening splash panel with the weird giant eye motif. A straightforward tale about a woman who begins to receive prophetic dreams of increasing intensity, beginning with a pricked thumb and ending with the death of her husband. It has one of those fun twist endings that's supposed to leave the audience wondering if the husband would have died had the wife not tried to intervene, but the real kicker for me is the coda, where the old witch explains that the printing press Fred falls into was used to print this very comic. This shit right here, it's great. Explain away the errors in early 4-color printing by calling it blood, then write a story about it. This is the kind of crap that made Kiss think it was a good idea to mix their blood with the ink in their 77 comic book. It's over the top, goofy, and a fun way of showing self-awareness. Proof that the concept existed in the medium well before Grant Morrison. Vault of Horror number 16. A fine issue with a number of good things going on for it, but to me the real draw here is an iconic, criminally underrated cover by the maestro Johnny Craig. Now Craig was an EC mainstay, best known for producing the cover to Crime Suspense Stories number 22, referenced in the Kefauver Committee's hearings on juvenile delinquency as the pinnacle of youth-corrupting bad taste. It's a shame really, because the man had a reputation for being one of the more restrained illustrators amongst the EC regulars. See, EC didn't have a house style, a clear design draft for recurring characters that artists were expected to adhere to. Instead, artists were told to play to their strengths, which led to regulars developing clear, distinct styles and specialities. Take, for instance, the square-jawed action of Wally Wood, or perhaps the vivid detail of ghastly Graham Engels, master of the desiccated corpse. Johnny Craig was a master of what I'd call the inhale, able to craft an image right on that needle point where suspense has peaked and the aftermath hasn't quite begun. The man had this knack for using one panel of hard directional lighting to create just a moment. Take this bit in Understudy to a Corpse, where a newlywed couple opens a mysterious chest left in the attic. Or this bit in Zombie, where a Haitian ritual is interrupted by a photographer's flash. These panels are the record scratch, the crescendo, the instant where everything shifts. Gorgeous on their own, but within the context of the page, it shows a mastery of suspense, of drama, knowing when to wait and when to let the other shoe drop. So take this guy, that skill, that sense of the moment, and give him a cover. Blisteringly simple in its execution, but wonderfully complex in its storytelling. Who is this man, this woman, this creature? Do they flee to their coffin at the break of day, or set out for the hunt at the setting of the sun? Why are they looking over their shoulder? There's just enough there to entice an audience with the promise of mystery and terror. The motivated, crisp lighting, the ragged silhouette, the coffin bleeding into the darkness. God, this cover fucking rules. This is a cover that sells comics. So there you have it. Just a couple of the fine stories that made the golden age of comics oh so special. And keep in mind, this is only a fraction of a corner of what was produced in a period spanning almost 2 decades. All this is to say that I'll probably be doing another deep dive into the Vault of Horror at some point to share what I found, but in the meantime, I'd encourage people to explore for themselves. Read more comics, find more weird, obscure crap that's relevant to you, and try and enjoy it.